A waitress was shoved into the pool. Everyone laughed. Then, a billionaire intervened, leaving everyone completely stunned. What if a single moment of cruelty could completely transform someone's life? Grace wiped down the last table at the country club's poolside eatery, her worn sneakers squeaking against the polished stone floor. At 34 years old, she had been serving the affluent members of Riverside Country Club for the past 3 years, practically invisible to most, except when they needed their drinks refilled. The summer heat still lingered in the air, even as evening began to creep in, and the pool area was buzzing with cheerful laughter emanating from a private graduation celebration. Grace had grown accustomed to plastering a smile on her face through everything life threw her way. The condescending glances, the pitifully small tips, the way some guests spoke about her as if she weren't standing right there. But tonight, there was a palpable difference in the air, a heaviness, much like the thick stillness that precedes a thunderstorm. She tucked a loose strand of her auburn hair behind her ear and balanced the tray laden with empty glasses, yearning to finish her shift and hurry home to her 8-year-old daughter. Little did she know that in just a matter of minutes, her entire world would be irrevocably altered in ways she couldn't possibly begin to fathom. Where are you watching from this evening? Grace had always possessed the innate ability to seek out the goodness in everyone, even when their actions made it incredibly difficult. Tonight's party was being held in honor of Charlotte Peton, the daughter of a local judge who had recently graduated from law school. The poolside terrace was adorned with twinkling string lights, and expensive champagne flowed freely amongst the crowd of 20-somethings. "Excuse me, waitress," Charlotte called out from her prime spot near the pool's edge. Grace approached with a practiced, professional smile, mentally noting how the young woman's designer dress likely cost more than Grace earned in 2 entire months. "We require more champagne, and ensure it's the premium stuff this time, understood?" The dismissive tone stung, but Grace simply nodded in acknowledgement. As she made her way towards the bar, Grace couldn't help but overhear Charlotte's conversation with her friends. "Did you happen to catch a glimpse of her shoes? I simply cannot fathom them allowing the help to dress in such a manner. Daddy should seriously have a word with management about their standards." The group erupted in laughter, and Grace could feel the heat rising in her cheeks. At the bar, Grace took a deep, calming breath and reminded herself of the reason she was there. Each shift brought her one step closer to saving enough money for her daughter Lily's essential school supplies, and perhaps even a small, modest birthday party next month. Frank, the bartender, noticed her less-than-cheerful expression. "A bit of a rough crowd tonight, eh?" he inquired gently. Grace managed to force a weak smile. "Nothing I can't handle." She carefully loaded the bottles of champagne onto her tray and cautiously made her way back towards the pool area. As she approached their table, Charlotte was engrossed in the middle of recounting a story about how her father had cleaned house at the courthouse. "Sometimes you simply need to remind people of their place in the pecking order," Charlotte declared. Grace delicately set down the champagne bottles, but as she turned to leave, Charlotte's voice abruptly halted her in her tracks. "Actually, waitress, there seems to be something spilled near my chair. Be a dear and tidy it up, would you?" Grace glanced down and saw nothing but pristine stone, but she knelt down anyway, feigning to wipe the area. The profound sense of humiliation felt like a lump lodged in her throat, but she desperately needed this job to provide for her family. As Grace stood back up, she noticed a man sitting alone at a corner table she hadn't previously noticed. He appeared to be around 42 years old, dressed casually in khakis and a button-down shirt, observing the scene with quiet intensity. Unlike the other guests, he didn't avert his gaze when their eyes met, instead offering her a small, almost imperceptible, sympathetic smile. Charlotte's voice grew increasingly louder as she continued to regale her friends with yet another story. "So, I said to the barista, 'Do you have any idea who my father is?' You should have seen how quickly she remade my latte." Charlotte stood up, swaying slightly from the effects of the champagne. Some people simply need to be taught their place in this world. Grace attempted to concentrate on her work, but as she passed by the group once again, Charlotte suddenly grabbed her arm. "Hold on a moment. I've got a brilliant idea for some fun. It's incredibly hot this evening, and you appear utterly exhausted. What do you say we assist you in cooling off a bit? Before Grace could even muster a response, Charlotte's boyfriend, Jake, leaped up, grinning mischievously. Oh, this is absolutely perfect. Grace began to back away, but she found herself surrounded by 5 of Charlotte's friends. Please, I need to get back to my work, Grace said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Frank, the bartender, cast a concerned glance in her direction, but he was confined behind the bar. The mysterious man in the corner had ceased eating and was now watching the unfolding events with unwavering focus, his expression growing increasingly dark and serious. Grace felt trapped as Charlotte and her friends continued to close in around her. Come now, don't be such a spoilsport, Charlotte said, her voice dripping with exaggerated sweetness. It's just a bit of harmless fun. Besides, your uniform could probably use a good wash anyway. The cruel insult struck Grace with the force of a physical blow. She thought about Lily back home, most likely diligently working on her homework, trusting that her mommy would return home with enough tip money to purchase groceries for the following day. If this moment touched your heart, please give the video a thumbs up. The tension in the air reached a breaking point as Charlotte nodded towards Jake, and Grace realized with a surge of horror what was about to transpire. She was just a few steps away from the pool's edge with absolutely nowhere to run, as nearly 20 people watched and waited with bated breath. Jake lunged forward and shoved Grace forcefully in the chest. She stumbled backward, arms windmilling wildly as she desperately attempted to regain her balance, but gravity ultimately prevailed. Grace plunged into the chlorinated water with a resounding splash that echoed across the entire terrace. The sudden cold shock knocked the wind out of her lungs as she sank beneath the surface. When she finally resurfaced, gasping for air and sputtering, the sound that greeted her ears was even more devastating than the icy water itself. Laughter not only from Charlotte's group, but from other guests who had gathered around to witness the spectacle. Grace treaded water in her soaked uniform, mascara streaming down her cheeks, feeling more deeply humiliated than she had ever felt in her entire life. Oh my God! That was absolutely priceless! Charlotte squealed with delight, pulling out her smartphone. This is definitely going on social media for the world to see. The crowd erupted in even louder laughter, and Grace felt something irrevocably break inside her chest. She desperately scanned the pool's edge for a ladder, but they were all located on the far side of the pool. Hey, while you're in there, perhaps you could tidy up the pool a bit, too, someone shouted, triggering another wave of cruel and mocking laughter. Grace's hands finally made contact with the pool's edge, but her wet fingers slipped precariously on the smooth stone as she desperately attempted to pull herself up. That's when she heard a voice slice through the laughter like a hot knife through butter. That's enough. The tone was calm, but it carried an undeniable authority that caused every single person to fall silent instantly. Grace looked up and saw the man from the corner table striding purposefully towards the pool, his face etched with controlled fury. He knelt down and extended his hand towards her. Let me help you. Something about his voice made Grace trust him implicitly. She grasped his outstretched hand, and he pulled her up with surprising strength, steadying her as she stood there dripping wet on the stone. Without uttering a word, he shrugged off his shirt and gently wrapped it around her shivering shoulders. Are you hurt? He asked softly, his eyes filled with genuine concern. Grace shook her head, although she was trembling uncontrollably from the cold and the lingering shock. Charlotte began to protest. Hey, we were just having some harmless fun. But the man's gaze snapped towards her with such intensity that she actually took a step backward. Have you ever faced something like this? Let us know in the comments. Grace clutched the shirt tighter around herself, deeply grateful for this unexpected act of kindness. But she could sense in his eyes that this situation was far from over, and Charlotte seemed to sense it, too, her cocky smile finally beginning to falter. The man stepped forward, his voice resonating across the now silent terrace. What I just witnessed was blatant assault. You deliberately pushed this woman into a pool, and then you proceeded to humiliate her while she was completely helpless. Charlotte attempted to laugh it off, but it came out as a nervous, shaky giggle. It was just a joke. Everyone was having fun. The man scanned the crowd, many of whom were now intently staring at their phones or suddenly finding their drinks exceptionally interesting. This woman was working, striving to earn money to support her family. And you thought it would be amusing to assault her for your own twisted entertainment? Charlotte's father, Judge Peton, emerged from the restaurant, looking rather perturbed. What seems to be the trouble here? Charlotte's face immediately brightened, confident that her father would effortlessly handle this stranger. Daddy, this man is making a mountain out of a molehill. We were simply playing around with the waitress. The mysterious man reached into his pocket and produced a business card, handing it to Judge Peton. As the judge read the card, his face drained of all color, turning completely white. He looked up at the man, then back down at the card, then back at his daughter with growing horror and disbelief. Charlotte, do you have any idea who this man is? Charlotte shrugged, still defiant and dismissive. Just some random guy who needs to mind his own business. But Judge Peton was already moving towards Grace, his hands trembling visibly. Miss, I am so terribly sorry for what has transpired here tonight. The mysterious man spoke once again, his voice still eerily calm and composed. My name is Daniel Sterling. I own Sterling Industries, and as of last month, I also own this country club. A collective gasp of shock and disbelief rippled through the crowd. Even Grace recognized that name. Sterling Industries was one of the largest and most influential companies in the entire state. Charlotte's face underwent a rapid transformation, going from confident to confused to utterly terrified in a matter of seconds. That's impossible, she stammered, her voice barely audible. You're dressed like... Daniel's smile was as cold and unforgiving as winter itself. Like someone who judges people by their character and inherent worth, rather than their bank account, he retorted. He then turned to Grace, his expression softening immediately. Ma'am, I would like to offer you my sincerest apology for what you have endured here tonight. This behavior is not representative of what this establishment stands for, and there will be immediate and severe consequences. Then he addressed the crowd. Anyone who participated in or encouraged what occurred here tonight is permanently banned from this property. If you've been enjoying this story, subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming tales. The stunned silence was abruptly broken only by the sound of security guards' footsteps as they rapidly approached the scene. Grace stood there, still wrapped in Daniel's shirt, watching as the people who had been laughing at her humiliation just moments before now desperately scrambled to distance themselves from Charlotte. Daniel turned back to Grace, his gaze filled with a gentleness that stood in stark contrast to the authority he had just displayed. Let's get you somewhere warm and dry, he said, guiding her towards the main building. I am truly sorry that you had to experience that. No one should ever be treated in such a manner, especially not while they are working hard to earn an honest living. In the manager's office, Grace changed into dry clothes. When she emerged, she found Daniel waiting patiently, holding a cup of hot tea and wearing a concerned expression. Are you feeling any better? Grace nodded, although she was still trying to process everything that had happened. I don't understand why you helped me, she said quietly. You don't even know me. Daniel smiled, and for the first time that evening, the smile reached his eyes, making them sparkle with warmth. My mother was a waitress when I was growing up. She worked 3 jobs just to keep food on our table. I have never forgotten where I came from, or how incredibly hard some people have to work simply to survive. He paused, looking out at the now empty pool area. People like Charlotte seem to believe that money somehow grants them the right to treat others as if they are less than human. They are wrong. He turned back to Grace, his expression serious and determined. I want to offer you a position at my company's headquarters. It's an administrative role with full benefits, paid time off, and a salary that is more than triple what you are currently making here. You would also have ample opportunities for advancement within the company. Grace's eyes welled up with tears of overwhelming gratitude. But, why? She whispered, her voice choked with emotion. You saw how I was treated tonight. Daniel shook his head firmly. What I witnessed was a woman who maintained her dignity and unwavering professionalism, even when confronted with unimaginable cruelty. You didn't retaliate, you didn't lose your temper, and you didn't allow them to break your spirit. Those are precisely the qualities that I value most. 3 months later, Grace sat in her new office, overlooking the city, helping to coordinate the company's charitable foundation. She had been able to move Lily to a better, safer school district, and for the first time in years, she wasn't plagued by constant worry about making rent. Sometimes, she reflected on that fateful night at the pool, not with bitterness or resentment, but with genuine gratitude. Daniel had become not just her employer, but also a trusted friend and mentor, who constantly reminded her that kindness is always a choice, and that true strength emanates from lifting others up, rather than tearing them down. Charlotte had been arrested and charged with assault, while Judge Peton had quietly resigned from his position on the bench. But perhaps the most profound and beautiful part of the entire experience was what Grace had learned about herself, that she was inherently worthy of respect, kindness, and opportunity, not because some powerful person had decided to help her, but because she had always possessed those invaluable qualities within herself. If you enjoyed this story, please remember to like, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more heartwarming tales. Sometimes, the most extraordinary and life-altering changes originate from the simplest acts of human decency and compassion.